You ever wonder what really matters at the end of your life? It's not the material possessions. It's not the money in the bank. It's who's standing by your side when you need them most. My story will show you how a single phrase can change the destiny of an entire family, and how sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who love us most. My name is Dorothy Margaret Patterson. I'm 73 years old, and I spent most of my life believing I was building a loving family that would care for me in my golden years. I was wrong, spectacularly, heartbreakingly wrong. But this story isn't just about disappointment. It's about discovering that sometimes the most profound love comes from the most unexpected places. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding my story requires understanding how I got here. I was born in 1951 in a small town in Ohio, the youngest of 4 children. My parents, Harold and Evelyn, were hard-working people who believed in sacrifice for family. My father worked double shifts at the steel mill, and my mother took in sewing to help make ends meet. They taught me that family was everything, that you took care of your own no matter what. When I was 22, I married James Patterson, a kind man who shared my values about family and responsibility. We moved to a suburb of Cleveland, where James worked as an accountant and I taught elementary school. We tried for years to have children, went through heartbreak after heartbreak with miscarriages and failed treatments. When I finally became pregnant with Robert at 28, it felt like a miracle. Robert was born in 1979, a beautiful baby with James's dark hair and my stubborn chin. I quit teaching to stay home with him, pouring all my love and attention into raising him. 2 years later, Jennifer arrived, and 3 years after that, Thomas completed our family. Those early years were the happiest of my life, a house full of laughter, scraped knees to kiss, bedtime stories to read, and the constant beautiful chaos of raising 3 children. James was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia when the kids were still young. Robert was 12, Jennifer was 10, and Thomas was just 7. The next 5 years were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, hope, and devastating setbacks. I worked part-time as a substitute teacher to help with medical bills, but mostly I was James's caregiver and the children's emotional anchor. When James died in 1996, I was 45 years old with 3 teenagers and a mortgage. The life insurance helped, but not enough. I went back to teaching full-time, took a second job tutoring on weekends, and somehow managed to keep our family afloat. I was determined that my children would have every opportunity, even if it meant I had none. Robert was always the ambitious one. Even as a child, he talked about becoming a lawyer, about making something of himself. I encouraged him, paid for SAT prep courses I couldn't afford, helped him apply to colleges that seemed impossibly expensive. When he got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship, I took out loans to cover the rest. I was so proud of him, so sure that his success would justify every sacrifice. Jennifer was my academic star. She had her father's methodical mind and my determination. She wanted to be a doctor from the time she was 8 years old, and I never doubted she would make it. When she got into medical school, I remortgaged the house to help pay for it. I told myself it was an investment in her future, in our family's future. Thomas was different from his siblings. He was charming, artistic, and struggled in school. While Robert and Jennifer were focused on their careers, Thomas was the one who stayed close to home. He went to community college, tried various jobs, and seemed to drift without clear direction. But he was also the one who called most often, who remembered my birthday, who seemed to need me most. By the time Robert graduated law school in 2004, I was already seeing the pattern that would define the rest of my life. He moved to California for a position at a prestigious firm, called occasionally, and visited even less. Jennifer finished her residency and started working 80-hour weeks at a hospital in Chicago. Thomas stayed local but seemed to cycle through jobs and relationships, always needing help, always struggling with something. I told myself this was normal. Children grow up, build their own lives, have their own priorities. I was proud of Robert's success, proud of Jennifer's career, and tried to be patient with Thomas's struggles. I thought that as they matured, as they settled into their lives, they would have more time for family, More time for me. In 2010, I retired from teaching. I had saved what I could, had a small pension, and owned my house outright. I looked forward to having more time to spend with my children, maybe helping with grandchildren when they came along. I imagined holidays filled with laughter, Sunday dinners with the whole family, being the kind of grandmother I had always dreamed of being. But retirement was lonelier than I expected. Robert had married Amanda, a woman from a wealthy family who made it clear she considered me an obligation rather than a welcome addition to their lives. They lived in a sprawling house in Marin County, and when I visited, I felt like an intruder. Their conversations were about things I didn't understand: wine tastings, charity galas, business deals. They had no children, claimed they were too busy with their careers. Jennifer had married and divorced twice, both times to men who couldn't handle her demanding schedule. She had 2 children, Emma and Jake, but they were largely raised by nannies and babysitters. When I offered to help, Jennifer said she preferred professional care. She sent me photos of the kids occasionally, but I barely knew them. Thomas was the one who seemed to need me most. He called frequently, visited regularly, and always had time to talk. I was grateful for his attention, even if it often came with requests for help. A loan to start a business, money to fix his car, help with rent when he was between jobs. I gave it gladly, happy to feel needed, happy to feel like I was making a difference in at least one of my children's lives. The years passed quietly. I joined a book club, volunteered at the local library, and tried to stay active. But I was increasingly aware of my isolation. My neighbors were friendly but distant. My siblings lived far away, and we rarely spoke. My social circle had shrunk to a handful of acquaintances, and I spent most evenings alone in a house that had once been filled with family. It was in 2020 that Marcus Chen moved in next door. He was recently divorced, had a teenage daughter named Lily, who visited every other weekend and worked as a high school history teacher. He was quiet, kept to himself, but was always polite when our paths crossed. We exchanged pleasantries over the fence, helped each other with small things. I'd bring him extra tomatoes from my garden. He'd bring in my trash cans when I forgot. I didn't think much about Marcus in those first few years. He was just a neighbor, a pleasant man who minded his own business. I had no idea how important he would become to my story. The first sign that something was wrong came in early 2023. I had been feeling tired for months, losing weight without trying, and having occasional pain in my abdomen. I attributed it to aging, to stress, to the natural changes that come with getting older. But when the pain became severe enough to send me to the emergency room, I knew something was seriously wrong. The tests came back quickly. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctor, a young oncologist named Dr. Martinez, was gentle but direct. "Mrs. Patterson, I won't sugarcoat this. Pancreatic cancer is one of the most aggressive forms of cancer. With treatment, we might buy you 6 months to 2 years. Without treatment, you probably have 2 to 3 months." I sat in that sterile office, absorbing the words that would change everything. My first thought wasn't about dying. It was about my children, about how they would handle this news, about how we would spend whatever time I had left. I called Robert first. He was in court, so I left a message. "Robert, it's Mom. I need to talk to you about something important. Please call me back as soon as you can." He called back 3 hours later, between meetings. "Mom, what's going on? I only have a few minutes." "Robert, I have cancer. Pancreatic cancer. It's serious." There was a long pause. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. What are the doctors saying?" I explained the diagnosis, the treatment options, the prognosis. Robert listened, asked the right questions, and promised to help however he could. But even as we talked, I could hear the distraction in his voice, the sound of papers shuffling, the underlying impatience of someone who had more important things to do. "I'll try to visit soon," he said. "Let me see what I can arrange with my schedule." Jennifer was more clinical in her response. As a doctor, she immediately wanted to know details about my diagnosis, my treatment plan, my medical team. She promised to make calls to ensure I was getting the best care available. But when I asked if she could visit, she hesitated. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a really critical time at work. We're short-staffed, and I've got patients who depend on me. But I'll make sure you're connected with the best oncologists in the area." Thomas was the only one who reacted the way I had hoped all my children would. He cried on the phone, promised to come over immediately, and spent the next few hours holding my hand and talking about treatment options. For the first time in months, I felt like I mattered to someone. The chemotherapy started 2 weeks later. Dr. Martinez had explained that it would be brutal: nausea, fatigue, hair loss, and a dozen other side effects. But she also said it was my best chance at extending my life, maybe even going into remission. The first treatment left me so sick I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. I had arranged for a home health aide, a professional woman named Sarah, who was competent but impersonal. She did her job well, but at the end of each day, she went home to her own family, leaving me alone with my fear and pain. It was during one of these difficult days that I heard a knock at my door. Sarah had left early because her daughter was sick, and I was alone, barely able to stand. I struggled to the door, every movement sending waves of nausea through my body. Marcus was standing on my porch, holding a container of soup and looking genuinely concerned. "Mrs. Patterson, I noticed you haven't been outside in a few days. Are you okay?" I must have looked terrible, pale, weak, wearing the same clothes I'd slept in. "I'm fine, Marcus. Just having a rough week." He studied my face carefully. "Are you sure? You look like you might need help." Something in his tone, the genuine worry in his eyes, broke through my defenses. "Actually, I'm not fine. I'm quite sick, and I'm scared. Would you like to talk about it? I could make you some tea." That was the beginning of everything. Marcus came inside, made tea in my kitchen like he'd done it 100 times before, and listened as I told him about my diagnosis. He didn't offer platitudes or false optimism. He just listened, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel like my fears were valid. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked when I finished. "You don't need to do anything. You barely know me. I know enough to see that you're a kind person who's going through something terrible. And I know that nobody should have to go through it alone." Over the following weeks, Marcus became my unexpected lifeline. He stopped by daily, not intrusively, but just to check in. He brought me soup when I was too sick to cook, sat with me during the worst of my treatments, and somehow managed to make me laugh even when I felt like dying. I learned more about Marcus during those weeks than I had in the 3 years he'd been my neighbor. He was 47, had been married for 15 years before his wife left him for her business partner. His daughter Lily was 16, lived with her mother most of the time, and was the light of his life. He taught American history at the local high school, coached the debate team, and had a master's degree in education. "Why are you doing this?" I asked him one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. "You have your own life, your own problems." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street where children were playing. My grandmother lived alone for the last 10 years of her life. I was in college, then starting my career, then dealing with my own marriage problems. I told myself I'd visit her more, call her more, but there was always something else that seemed more important. What happened to her? She died alone in her apartment. The neighbors found her 3 days later. His voice was heavy with regret. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to someone else if I could help it. "But I'm not your grandmother." "No, but you're someone's grandmother, someone's mother. And right now, you need someone to care about you." Marcus's care wasn't like the professional attention I got from Sarah or the clinical concern from Jennifer. It was personal, intuitive, and somehow exactly what I needed. When I was anxious about treatments, he'd distract me with stories about his students. When I was too weak to shower, he'd help me wash my hair in the kitchen sink without making me feel embarrassed. When I couldn't sleep because of the pain, he'd sit with me and play soft music or read aloud from books we both enjoyed. My children's responses to my illness, meanwhile, followed predictable patterns. Robert called weekly, always brief conversations that felt more like items being checked off a to-do list. He sent flowers for my birthday, expensive ones, ordered online with a generic card. When I mentioned that I was struggling, he'd offer to hire help, to pay for services, but never to actually come himself. Jennifer was more involved, but in a detached medical way. She reviewed my treatment plan, spoke with my doctors, and made sure I was getting appropriate care. But she rarely asked how I was feeling emotionally, rarely just sat with me. When she did visit, she spent most of the time on her phone, dealing with work emergencies. Thomas was the most present, but his presence always came with underlying stress. He visited regularly, but I began to notice that every visit included some mention of his financial struggles. The rent was due, his car needed repairs, he had an opportunity to make money, but needed startup capital. I gave him what he asked for, grateful for his attention, but increasingly aware that his concern might be more about my bank account than my well-being. If you're watching this, and you have elderly neighbors or relatives who might be struggling alone, please reach out to them. You never know how much a simple gesture can mean. And if this story is resonating with you, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue sharing these important stories. The second round of chemotherapy was worse than the first. I lost all my hair, lost 20 pounds, and spent most days feeling like I was dying from the inside out. It was during this time that I truly understood what it meant to be cared for versus being managed. Sarah, my home health aide, was efficient and professional. She made sure I took my medications, helped me with basic tasks, and monitored my vital signs. But at 5 o'clock, she went home to her own family, leaving me alone with my fears and pain. Marcus, however, seemed to understand that healing required more than medical management. He'd arrive in the evening after his teaching day ended, bringing dinner he'd cooked himself. He'd sit with me while I tried to eat, making conversation about everything except my illness. He told me about his students, about books he was reading, about places he'd traveled. "Why don't you ever talk about my cancer?" I asked him one evening. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sometimes I feel like it's all anyone talks about. The doctors, the nurses, my children, everything is about treatments and symptoms and prognosis. What would you rather talk about? I don't know. Normal things, life, the person I was before I got sick. Tell me about that person. And so I did. I told him about my childhood, about meeting James, about the early years of marriage when everything seemed possible. I told him about teaching, about the joy of watching children learn to read, about the satisfaction of making a difference in young lives. I told him about my dreams, my regrets, my fears that had nothing to do with cancer. Marcus listened to all of it with the kind of attention that made me feel seen, not just as a patient or a burden, but as a complete person with a full life story. It was during one of these conversations that I realized something profound. I felt more known by this neighbor I'd barely spoken to 6 months ago than I did by my own children. Marcus asked about my thoughts, my feelings, my memories. My children asked about my symptoms, my treatments, my prognosis. The holidays that year were particularly difficult. I had always been the one to host family gatherings, to cook elaborate meals, to create the traditions that bound us together. But I was too sick to manage any of it. Robert sent a beautiful flower arrangement with a card that read, "Thinking of you during the holidays. Love, Robert and Amanda." No visit, no phone call, just flowers that reminded me of how alone I was. Jennifer called on Christmas morning, but she was at the hospital working a holiday shift. "I'm sorry, Mom, but we're swamped here. I'll try to visit after the new year." Thomas came by on Christmas Eve, bringing a small gift and staying for a few hours. We watched old movies and talked about Christmases past. But before he left, he mentioned that he was behind on his rent and wondering if I could help him out. I wrote him a check, as I always did, but felt a familiar sadness about the transactional nature of our relationship. Marcus knocked on my door Christmas morning, carrying a container of homemade cookies and a small wrapped package. "I know you're not feeling well, but I thought you might like some company." The gift was a photo album filled with pictures he'd taken around the neighborhood over the past year. Flowers in bloom, children playing, seasonal changes. On the last page, he'd written, "For Dorothy, who taught me that the most beautiful things in life are the ones we notice when we slow down enough to really see." I cried reading those words, not from sadness, but from gratitude. This man who owed me nothing had given me something invaluable, the gift of being truly seen. As winter turned to spring, my health continued to decline. The cancer had spread to my liver, and Dr. Martinez gently explained that the treatment was no longer effective. I had weeks, maybe a month or two. "I want to ask you something important," she said during one of our appointments. "How do you want to spend this time? What's most important to you?" I looked around the sterile office, thinking about the question. "I want to spend it with people who actually want to be with me." "Your family?" "Some of them, and my neighbor Marcus. He's been—" I paused, searching for the right words. "He's been my family in ways my actual family hasn't been." Dr. Martinez nodded. "I've seen this before. Sometimes the people who show up for us aren't the ones we expect." That evening, I called my lawyer, Margaret Wilson. She had handled my family's legal affairs for 20 years, had drawn up my will when James died, and had helped me navigate the financial aspects of single parenthood. "Margaret, I need to make some changes to my will." "Of course, Dorothy. What kind of changes?" "I want to rewrite the entire thing." There was a pause. "That's a significant decision. Are you sure you want to make major changes while you're dealing with your illness?" "I'm sure. In fact, my illness has clarified things for me in ways I never expected." Margaret came to my house the next day, bringing her laptop and legal papers. She listened without comment as I explained what I wanted, though I could see surprise flickering across her face. "Dorothy, this is a very unusual distribution of assets. Your children are going to be shocked. They've had their entire lives to show me they cared about more than my money. They chose not to. But they're your children. They love you." "Do they? Or do they love the idea of me, the security I represent, the inheritance they expect?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "What makes you think Marcus deserves this?" "Because he's the only person who's taken care of me without expecting anything in return. He's the only one who's made me feel like I matter as a person, not just as a source of resources." "Dorothy, I have to ask, has Marcus ever mentioned your will? Has he ever suggested that you leave him anything?" "Never. In fact, when I tried to give him money for groceries he'd bought me, he refused. He said taking care of me wasn't a transaction." Margaret worked on the new will for several days, making sure every detail was legally sound. When she brought it back for my signature, she made one final attempt to change my mind. "Dorothy, I've known you for 20 years. This isn't like you. You've always been so generous with your children." "I've been generous with them their entire lives. I put Robert through college and law school. I helped Jennifer through medical school. I've given Thomas thousands of dollars over the years. What I haven't been generous with is my expectations. I never expected them to actually care about me as a person. They do care about you. They care about the idea of me. They care about what I represent to them. But they don't care about Dorothy the person, her thoughts, her fears, her dreams, her need for companionship." I signed the will on a Tuesday morning in April. The new will was straightforward. Marcus would inherit my house, worth approximately $400,000, and the majority of my savings and investments, totaling about $350,000. My children would each receive $50,000 and selected personal items with sentimental value. I also wrote detailed letters to each of my children, explaining my decision. These weren't angry letters. They were sad ones, filled with love and disappointment in equal measure. The letter to Robert was the most difficult. "My dearest Robert, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will know about my will. I want you to understand that this decision came from a place of love, not anger. You have achieved everything you ever dreamed of. You're successful, wealthy, and respected in your field. I am proud of what you've accomplished, but I am heartbroken by what you've lost along the way. In your pursuit of success, you forgot that relationships require investment. You treated me like an obligation to be managed rather than a person to be loved. You called when it was convenient, visited when it didn't interfere with your schedule, and somehow convinced yourself that expensive gifts could substitute for actual presence. I know you love me, Robert, but love without presence is just a beautiful word. I needed my son, and you gave me your voicemail. The $50,000 I'm leaving you represents more than you've invested in our relationship in the past 5 years. I hope it will remind you that success means nothing if you achieve it at the expense of the people who love you most. I pray that you will learn from this, that you will invest in the people who matter before it's too late. With all my love and all my disappointment, Mom. The letter to Jennifer was equally painful. My beloved Jennifer, I am so proud of the doctor you became. You save lives every day, and that is a calling that few people have the courage to answer. But in saving strangers, you forgot to care for your own mother. I know you're busy. I know your work is important. But I was dying, Jennifer. I was dying, and you managed my illness like you manage everything else, efficiently, professionally, and without emotional investment. You made sure I had the best medical care, but you never asked how I was feeling beyond the clinical sense. You never just sat with me and let me be afraid. You never made me feel like your mother instead of your patient. Your children barely know me because you decided that professional care was better than family care. I wonder if they'll make the same decision about you when you're old and sick. The $50,000 I'm leaving you might help with Emma and Jake's education. I hope you'll use some of it to spend time with them so they don't grow up feeling the way I felt in my final months. I love you, Jennifer. I just wish you had loved me enough to see me as more than a problem to be solved. With love and sorrow, Mom. The letter to Thomas was the most heartbreaking. My sweet Thomas, you were always my favorite, though I probably shouldn't admit that, even now. You were the one who seemed to need me most, who called most often, who visited most regularly. But I finally realized that you didn't need me. You needed my money. This realization has been more painful than the cancer itself. Every visit, every call, every expression of concern was tied to a financial request. You turned our relationship into a transaction, and that breaks my heart in ways I can't adequately express. I enabled this behavior by always giving you what you asked for. I thought I was helping you, but I was actually teaching you that love could be bought and sold, that my value to you was measured in dollars. You have so much potential, Thomas. You're charming, creative, and capable of great things. But you've learned to take the easy path, to rely on others instead of building your own strength. The $50,000 I'm leaving you is the last money you'll ever receive from me. I hope you'll use it to learn how to stand on your own, to discover your own worth, to build relationships based on love rather than financial dependency. Maybe someday you'll understand that the most valuable thing I ever offered you wasn't my money, it was my love, and you chose to focus on the money and ignore the love. I forgive you, Thomas. I hope you'll forgive yourself and learn to do better. With love and heartbreak, Mom. I sealed the letters and gave them to Margaret, along with instructions that they should be delivered after my death, along with the reading of the will. As my health continued to decline, Marcus arranged for additional help during the day so he could continue working. But every evening, every weekend, every free moment he had, he spent with me. He never made me feel like a burden, never suggested that caring for me was interfering with his life. We spent those final weeks going through my photo albums, with me telling him stories about my life. He listened to everything, stories about my childhood, my marriage, my children's births, my career, my dreams and disappointments. He seemed to understand that these stories were my legacy, the evidence that I had lived a full life. You know what I've realized? I told him one evening as we sat on my porch for what would be one of the last times. What's that? I spent my whole life trying to be the kind of mother who would be loved unconditionally. But I forgot to expect that same unconditional love in return. Do you regret it? I regret not setting boundaries. I regret not teaching my children that love is reciprocal. But I don't regret loving them. And I don't regret the time I've spent with you these past months. These months have been a gift for me too, Dorothy. You've taught me so much about grace, about dignity, about facing difficult things with courage. You've taught me something too. What's that? You've taught me what it feels like to be truly cared for, not managed, Not obligated to, but genuinely cared for. That's a gift I never expected to receive at this stage of my life. In May, I had another crisis. Marcus found me collapsed in my kitchen when he came to check on me after I didn't answer his morning knock. The paramedics said I had internal bleeding and severe dehydration. This time, even I knew I wasn't going home. The hospital room became the stage for the final act of my family drama. Robert flew in from California, looking uncomfortable and out of place in the sterile environment. Jennifer took time off work, which I knew was difficult for her. Thomas came immediately, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not about money, but about losing me. But it was Marcus who was there around the clock. He had taken leave from his job and rarely left my side. The nurses had to remind him to eat, to go home and shower, to take care of himself. "You're lucky to have such a devoted son," one of the nurses said to me. "He's not my son," I whispered. "Oh, I'm sorry. Your son-in-law?" "No, he's my neighbor, my friend." The nurse looked confused. "But he's been here every day for weeks. He knows all your medications, your preferences, your medical history better than anyone." "I know. That's what makes him so special." On what turned out to be my final day, all four of them were there. Robert sat in the corner, occasionally checking his phone. Jennifer stood by the window looking out at the parking lot. Thomas held my hand, tears streaming down his face. And Marcus sat in the chair closest to my bed, reading aloud from a book of poetry I had mentioned loving years ago. As evening approached, I could feel myself slipping away. The pain was finally fading, replaced by a strange sense of peace. I looked at each of them. These three people I had carried in my body, raised with all the love I had, sacrificed for and worried about and dreamed about. "I love you all," I said, meaning it completely despite everything. They each said they loved me too, and I believed them. They did love me, in their own limited ways. But love without presence, love without sacrifice, love without genuine care. What kind of love was that really? "Marcus," I whispered, and he leaned closer. "I'm here, Dorothy." "You still matter to me," I said, echoing the words he had spoken to me so many times. "You always will." His eyes filled with tears. "You matter to me too. You always have." Those were the last words I spoke. As I closed my eyes for the final time, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that in my final months, I had experienced what it meant to be truly cared for, to be seen as a whole person rather than just a role or a resource. I died peacefully that night, surrounded by 4 people who had shaped my understanding of love, 3 who had taught me what love without presence looked like, and 1 who had shown me what love with presence could be. The funeral was well attended. Robert gave a touching eulogy about my dedication to family. Jennifer spoke about my strength and resilience. Thomas shared memories of my kindness and generosity. They all spoke beautifully about the mother they remembered, the woman who had sacrificed everything for them. Marcus didn't speak at the funeral. He sat in the back, quietly grieving for the friend he had lost, the woman who had taught him about the profound impact of simple kindness. The reading of the will took place a week later. Margaret had arranged for everyone to gather at her office. Robert had flown back to California but returned for the reading. Jennifer had taken the day off work. Thomas was there early, looking anxious but probably assuming he would inherit the house he had always expected. Marcus had been invited but seemed confused about why he needed to be there. He sat quietly in the back, still dressed in the black suit he had worn to my funeral, looking uncomfortable with the formal proceedings. Margaret began with the standard legal language, then got to the heart of the matter. "To my son, Robert Patterson, I leave my dining room set, which belonged to your great-grandmother, my china collection, my first edition books, and the sum of $50,000. The shock on Robert's face was immediate and complete. He had always assumed he would inherit the house, had probably already made mental plans for selling it. "To my daughter, Jennifer Patterson Mills, I leave my jewelry collection, including your grandmother's wedding ring, my medical textbooks, my garden tools, and the sum of $50,000. Jennifer's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked around the room as if she might have misheard. To my son, Thomas Patterson, I leave my photo albums, my recipe collection, my sewing machine, and the sum of $50,000. Thomas stood up abruptly. That's it? That's all we get? There has to be some mistake. Margaret continued calmly, though I could see her bracing for the reaction. To Marcus Chen, my neighbor and friend, I leave my house at 247 Maple Street, all remaining financial assets, including savings, investments, and checking accounts, and all other personal property not specifically mentioned above. The room erupted. Robert was on his feet, his face red with anger. This is impossible. He's not even family. He manipulated a sick old woman. This has to be fraud, Jennifer said, her medical training kicking in. Mom wasn't in her right mind. The cancer, the medications, she couldn't have made this decision rationally. Thomas was shouting now. He took advantage of her. He isolated her from her family. This is elder abuse. But Marcus sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face. He looked as shocked as everyone else in the room. Margaret raised her hand for silence. Before anyone makes accusations, I want you to know that I spent considerable time with your mother before she made this decision. She was completely lucid, understood the implications of her choices, and insisted on this distribution. She also left letters for each of you. I suggest you read them before you make any more accusations. She handed out the sealed envelopes. The room fell silent as my 3 children read my final words to them. I watched their faces change as they read, anger giving way to recognition, shock giving way to shame. When they finished reading, the room was quiet, except for the sound of Thomas crying. She was our mother, Jennifer said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She was supposed to leave everything to us. Why? The question came from Marcus, who had been silent until now. Why was she supposed to leave everything to you? Because we're her children. And what did you do to earn that inheritance? His voice was gentle but firm. When did you last visit her just because you wanted to spend time with her? When did you last call her without needing something? When did you last make her feel like she mattered to you as a person? The room fell silent again. The truth of his words hung in the air like a challenge none of them could meet. I don't want her money, Marcus said suddenly. I never wanted her money. I never even knew she had money. I wanted her friendship, her stories, her wisdom. I wanted to make sure she wasn't alone. Then give it back, Thomas said quickly, a note of desperation in his voice. Marcus looked at him steadily. Your mother made this choice for a reason. She wanted to make sure someone who truly cared about her was taken care of, the way she had been taken care of. She wanted to send a message about what love really means. I'm going to honor her wishes. So you're going to keep it all? Robert asked, his voice bitter. I'm going to use it the way she would have wanted. I'm going to make sure it goes to people who understand the value of caring for others, who know that love requires more than just words. My children, predictably, contested the will. Robert hired the best estate attorney in California, convinced that he could prove I had been manipulated or mentally incompetent. Jennifer used her medical connections to find experts who would testify about the effects of cancer and chemotherapy on decision-making capacity. Thomas hired a local lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. The legal battle lasted 2 years. During that time, Marcus continued living in my house, maintaining it exactly as I had left it. He could have sold it, could have moved somewhere more luxurious, but he seemed to understand that the house itself was part of my legacy. Margaret had been thorough in documenting my mental state. She had recordings of our conversations, medical evaluations showing my competency, and detailed notes about my reasoning for the will changes. She also had something my children didn't expect: witnesses. Dr. Martinez testified that I had been fully alert and oriented during all our conversations about end-of-life planning. Sarah, my home health aide, confirmed that I had been lucid and capable of making decisions. Even several of my neighbors testified that they had seen the difference between how my children treated me and how Marcus cared for me. But the most damning evidence came from phone records and bank statements. The records showed the pattern of Thomas's calls coinciding with financial withdrawals. They showed Robert's brief, infrequent contacts. They showed Jennifer's clinical, businesslike communications. In contrast, they showed Marcus's daily check-ins, his frequent calls to medical offices on my behalf, his coordination of my care. They showed that he had never asked me for money, had never benefited financially from our relationship. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had clearly dealt with similar family dynamics before. In her final ruling, she said something that I wish I could have heard. The evidence is clear that Dorothy Patterson was a competent adult who made a deliberate decision about her estate. While it may seem unusual for someone to leave the majority of their assets to a non-relative, the evidence shows that Mr. Chen provided care and companionship that her biological children did not. This court cannot and will not substitute its judgment for that of the deceased, particularly when her reasoning is so well documented and her mental capacity so clearly established. My children lost the case and were ordered to pay court costs. More importantly, they lost the last chance to understand the lesson I had tried to teach them. Robert returned to California, where he threw himself even deeper into his work. But something had changed. Amanda later told people that he had started calling his elderly neighbors, offering help with groceries and yard work. He never spoke about the will, but his behavior suggested that my message had reached him, even if it came too late. Jennifer reduced her work hours and started spending more time with Emma and Jake. She also began volunteering at a senior center, reading to elderly patients who had no family visitors. When asked why she had made these changes, she simply said she had learned something important about the value of presence. Thomas was the most affected by the ordeal. The shame of having his transactional relationship with me exposed in court was devastating. He moved away from town, got a steady job, and began attending therapy to address his pattern of financial dependence on others. It took him years to rebuild his life, but he eventually did. Marcus, meanwhile, used my inheritance in ways that would have made me proud. He kept the house, but converted part of it into a resource center for elderly people who needed companionship. He funded a program that matched volunteers with isolated seniors, ensuring that others wouldn't have to face their final years alone. He also established a scholarship fund for students who wanted to pursue careers in elder care. Nurses, social workers, and others who understood the value of caring for vulnerable populations. The fund was named the Dorothy Patterson Memorial Scholarship for Compassionate Care. Marcus remarried eventually to a woman named Elena who shared his values of service and kindness. They had a small ceremony in the backyard of what used to be my house, surrounded by the elderly friends who had found community there. Elena had been volunteering at the center when they met, and she brought her own elderly mother to live with them, creating the kind of multi-generational household that had become rare in American society. And that's the end of my story, but not the end of its impact. What happened after my death rippled outward in ways I never could have imagined. My children learned difficult lessons about love and presence. Marcus used my gift to create lasting change in our community. And hopefully, anyone listening to this story will think differently about the elderly people in their own lives. The truth is, we all have neighbors like I was, people who seem fine on the surface, but who are struggling with loneliness, with health challenges, with the fear of being forgotten. We all have Marcus's opportunity to make a difference in someone's life through simple acts of kindness. My story isn't really about money or inheritance. It's about the profound human need to be seen, to be valued, to matter to someone. It's about the difference between love as an obligation and love as a choice. It's about recognizing that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when showing up is hard. If you're watching this and you have elderly parents, neighbors, or relatives, please don't wait until it's too late. Don't let work or busy schedules or your own problems keep you from connecting with them. Don't assume that professional care can substitute for personal attention. Don't let them spend their final years wondering if they matter to anyone. And if you're elderly yourself, watching this story and recognizing parts of your own experience, please know that you do matter. Your stories matter. Your feelings matter. Your need for companionship and care is valid and important. The most profound lesson of my life came in my final months. That love isn't just something you feel, it's something you do. It's not just words you say, it's time you spend. It's not just money you give, it's presence you offer. Marcus taught me that love with presence is transformative. My children taught me that love without presence is just a beautiful word that doesn't mean much when you're facing your darkest moments alone. I hope my story will inspire someone to pick up the phone, to knock on a door, to sit with someone who needs companionship. I hope it will remind someone that the most valuable gift you can give another person is your time, your attention, your genuine care. I hope it will help someone understand that we all have the power to be Marcus in someone else's story, to be the unexpected source of kindness that changes everything. If this story has touched you, if it's made you think about the people in your own life who might need more than they're getting, please subscribe to this channel and share this story. Not for the views or the likes, but because these are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us of our shared humanity and our responsibility to care for each other. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing my life, my mistakes, my lessons learned too late, and my gratitude for unexpected love. Remember, you matter to someone. The question is, who matters to you, and how are you showing them that they do? Until next time, take care of each other. Check on your neighbors, call your elderly relatives. Be present in the lives of the people you love, because in the end, that's all that really matters. Not the money we leave behind, but the love we shared while we were here. My name was Dorothy Margaret Patterson. I lived for 73 years, and I learned my most important lesson in my final months. I hope my story helps you learn yours before it's too late.